and welcome to the Huddle Breakdown with me, Laura Bradburn. I am joined by James and Alan on the road. Alan, how you doing?
I'm all right. I'm listening. I'm living the dream. This is kind of, grassroots football. This is pretty hardcore. I'm at Rossington Main FC. So this is like an old miners' welfare club. So I'm expecting this to be a tough game. This is the women as well. Over in this part of the world, the women got sent down the pits as well. So it's actually a championship decider. So it's a big game. So yeah, I didn't want to. We had to get here really early. They like to have a lot of warm up and all that sort of stuff. It's all very serious. So I've got time to kind of fit this in between dropping the girl off and kickoff's not for nearly an hour. So got time to talk some Celtic. So that's good.
Yeah, I have to say, Glaswegian women have a certain reputation, but I wouldn't cross a Yorkshire woman if you paid me. They're quite tough going. I've come across a few of them in my life, and they are not to be messed with.
Certainly not if they're from an old mining community. I can assure you.
James, how are you doing?
Good. Nothing as exciting as that. Just a boring old week of more yard work. It's endless.
Yeah, I mean, I was about to nod sympathetically there. I've never done an ounce of yard work in my entire life, so I don't really know how that feels, but I assume it's difficult.
Well, this is the time of year where pollen shows up, and it's a film of pollen just every day.
Yeah.
So being outside, you get to enjoy that. And I'm not even allergic to the crap, and it's still miserable. But
yeah.
Here we are.
It was supposed to be fair. Sorry for him, Laura. When he says yard, he means an area bigger than Celtic Park.
No,
typical American yard.
and it means actually paying the gardener, obviously. Yeah.
No, on that either.
Speaking of big yards, we were playing at Hampden this weekend. James, I'll come to you first. A pretty satisfying victory, I have to say, overall for me, looking back on it. Even a quite good performance from Adam Ida, I would suggest. Doing some of the stuff that we have asked him to do, continuing to do some of the stuff we haven't asked him to do, but doing it better. It was all good. What was your overall thoughts on the match and the victory over St Johnstone in the Scottish Cup semi-final?
Yeah, it was... Ultimately, I mean, the first half hour was a little bit, feeling each other out type of thing. But for that magical 12 minutes or whatever it was, of the explosion at the end of the first half, it's tough for a team like St Johnstone. I ate a healthy dose of crow after the game in Perth because I went into that with our preview show with Martin, expounding upon how bad of a matchup this was for St Johnstone, the way they play and trying to play out from the back against our press and, how their midfield wasn't all that dynamic as far as man marking, that kind of stuff. So, of course, they went ahead and, won 1-0 and maybe look even more like a horse's ass than I usually do. But in the decomposition of that game, the two theories I had was basically the pitch was an absolute travesty and played a huge role. And the second was related to that is that it shifted how St. Johnstone played. They didn't really try to play out from the back because the pitch was so bad that they smartly adjusted how they played. And I thought what we saw on the weekend was basically a manifestation of kind of what I expected in the Perth game, meaning that they tried and, in fairness to them, did a pretty good job with man marking in the first half hour, kind of gave us our patented issues in that regard in some ways. And then as soon as they dropped off a level and, some of that may have been because of the mistake and them putting their head down a little bit was kind of my sense. But, caught them trying to play out from the back and then we just basically swarmed them. And that was, even their manager said they have to play like a pseudo perfect game in order to, have a really good chance in this kind of game. And they most prohibitively did not do that, including the keeper who had, been pretty good up until this game where he had a couple of shots. I would guess he'd think he probably should have saved. So yeah, but again, our guys, when given time and space and guys that are half a step slow and trying to man mark them, and we basically just ran all over them. Which was delightful. I mean, again, we talk about this all the time. These are the games that are fun when the matchup's bad, and then the team that has the downside of the bad matchup puts their head down a little bit, and you put the pedal on the gas and have some fun goals. So yes, very very enjoyable afternoon.
It was enjoyable. Alan, James touched on it there. Not so long since we obviously lost against St Johnstone away in Perth. A much more convincing performance from us in the Scottish Cup. How much of it do you think was down to maybe a change of approach from Brendan, or a change of approach from the team, or the same from St Johnstone? What were the differences between the two matches that made the big difference to the result for you?
Yeah, I don't know, Laura. I switched off after 10 minutes because I was bored. I'm fed up with all this Celtic winning matches. And no, so listen. I mean, you can talk about these games and try to sound smart, like I'm sure we get accused of doing all the time, and say, well, where Celtic were getting joy, especially the first sort of half hour, where I thought St Johnstone actually did pretty well, was that although, St Johnstone constrained Celtic to a lot of long shots. I mean, we took a lot of long shots. Whether we don't fancy the goalkeeper or what, I don't know. But where we were getting joy was we were often getting the wingers one-on-one with the fullback, which is kind of exactly what you want. And that was working out well. And I'd love to say that's why we won, but it wasn't. It was just like a mistake, and then or a series of mistakes on their part, really. I mean, giving the ball away in central midfield like that, allowing Hatate time to get his head up and to think about what he's doing, and then McGregor running onto the ball, and then them just sitting off him. I mean, just probably at least 3 errors there, the patented 3 errors and a goal type of thing. So, yeah, you could say, oh, what did Celtic do differently? What did they do better? But essentially, if you're going to make mistakes like that, or a series of mistakes like that, when you're in a matchup, as James said, that is so extreme, then you're going to get punished, really. I mean, they did do pretty well, as I say, for 30 odd minutes. They went. I was a bit surprised. I thought they'd go more of a 5-4-1. They went with the 4-4-2 again. And they went a lot of man-to-man marking in midfield, which is fine. Man marking the fullbacks, man marking the 3 midfielders, man marking Ida, and then allowing the centre-backs to have the ball. And that was working okay for them, although there was a danger they were just going to get overwhelmed anyway, really. But as I say, it's actually mistakes that kind of that do it, and the fullbacks especially were massively overmatched, and you saw that with the goal that Maeda scored. The guy just stretching every sinew to keep Maeda out, and he just couldn't. I thought there was a couple of notable performances in terms of good examples of how to break down a man-to-man kind of low block, mid block press. I think Scales again brought the ball out from the back really well. And that really helps, because then everyone's got a decision to make. Who's man marking? Do we just let him trundle up to the edge of the box, or does somebody actually go out to stop him? What do we do? And it causes confusion in the system. And McGregor as well. McGregor was just changing the tempo of the game. He put speed into the game at moments, including the goal and actually the second goal. And with the directness of his pass, the run, and his pass through the lines and between the centre back and the full back to Maeda, and that once you're 2-0 up, and then you're Celtic, the game's gone as far as they're concerned. So I think a lot of credit to McGregor for really kind of opening the game up like that. And also, he panicked, really, didn't he, when he scored that goal? He was panic written all over his face as he waited for the perfect moment for the defender to move out the way so he could put it straight into the corner. So, I thought he was excellent in terms of, because again, it's one of these games where at the end of it, a load of data, but really, what were the moments that won the game? And it was really those moments, McGregor's influence, and as I say, Scales just really disrupting their system, especially, I thought was worthy of note as well.
Yeah, Alan, I think I was screaming at him to shoot before he did shoot, and then I remembered that he's totting up the XG in his head and thinking, no, Alan wouldn't want me to shoot yet. I need to wait. And then he waited for the optimal time and put it away. So it was a good one. I actually think that's one of the reasons the St Johnstone defence stepped off him so much. I think they were expecting him to shoot once or twice before he actually did. But that's bad defending on their part, obviously. James, Alan brought it up, and I was really impressed to see it, those overlapping runs and through balls that were coming from the runs of Maeda and Forrest on the other side. Great passing from Hatate and McGregor in midfield. Was there any other performances, or would you want to expand on the ones that we've already mentioned that you thought were kind of particularly outstanding in the game? You're muted.
Boy, and Alan's the one in the car, and I'm the one pulling amateur stuff.
Yeah. Two fat fingers. I can't find anything anyway, don't worry.
As you said in the open, Laura, I thought Ito, on his kind of scatter plot of good versus bad, was way skewed further than he usually is towards the good. Some of his combination play, it's been a little while, and again, and this is anecdotal. I'm not saying this is true, but going off of memory, which is dangerous these days for me, I don't remember him recently collecting the ball, turning and running at pace, which was nice to see, because he is, capable of that, and certainly big and fast enough to be able to do it. So that was nice, because that was, again, it to Alan's point on scales, and I echo his comments. I thought, again, he was a difference maker in what he was able to do in breaking their lines. Ida dropping into that area of the pitch and doing that is similar, because the center back generally isn't going to track him that deep, even though he was man marked for the most part in St Johnstone's defensive third. So he squares up and then runs at it. It's almost like a comparable movement to what Scales was getting joy out of and stressing their defense. So I thought he was good. Again, Forrest did what Forrest does. I mean, just linking up, quality on the ball, and he knitted it together again in some of those attacks. Like, he didn't make the assisting pass, but he was part of the combinations that led to the goals, particularly the early ones. So yeah, I thought he was good as well. And then late, I mean, Alistair Johnson, that delivery was, and the finish the game was already done, but that's just one of those, tremendous goals on a half volley with the left foot at that angle. I mean, with a great cross to the back post. Even Carter Vickers had some line splitting passes, which he's, not always apt at doing. So yeah, I think, just, again, this is one of those games with maybe a couple of exceptions, and they weren't bad. I just think they didn't pop as much as the other players. That when you get these, systemic joy or systemic collapses in matchup, that, almost everybody looks really good when you get this kind of matchup that manifests. But the last thing I'll say is I just, mentioned it after the Kilmarnock game with McInnes, and were very complimentary of the adjustments that they made in Perth post hoc in Valkyrie, is that his name? Made at the game
Valkyrie,
in Perth, but Valkyrie, yeah. Just to persist man marking our side with their team in the final third. Like, I get it high and in build up, even in like a mid block. But once we get them pinned in, within the defensive third, that's a recipe for what we did exactly, which is the guys just interchanging the dynamic movement of McGregor and those through balls, splitting lines, and us having multiple players with advantages in pace and quickness. Just kind of a madness strategy from my perspective against what our relative strengths and weaknesses are. So I hope a lot of teams continue to man mark us in our attacking third, their defensive third.
Yeah, that would be to our benefit, I think. I can't now get the image of Simo Valakari on a giant winged horse out of my head, because you mentioned Valkyrie. I was just like, that is an image, but I'll leave that to everybody to imagine. Alan, you mentioned it before, and it is something that I've seen in some of the written media, this idea that, we've reached another domestic cup final. We're potentially on the verge of another treble. Why anybody would be getting bored with it, I'm not sure. I'm certainly not. But I don't understand, the narrative that just because the same thing keeps happening means it's a good enough reason for something else to happen. Surely these teams, whether they've got the means to or not, the whole point is they have to earn the right to take trophies off us if they're going to do that.
No, absolutely. And to finish off on the game before I get into that, I haven't mentioned Rio Hatate really. I mean, 3 assists is quite an unusual event. I'm not at my laptop. I can't tell you the number of occasions I've logged 3 assists for the one player, so apologies for that. I'll stick a note up on the site afterwards. But, if you give him time and space to get his head up, there's no better player in Scotland that's going to hurt you if you're not all over him. And that showed again. I think that showed a beautiful cross for Ida, especially off of his left foot. Was particularly delicious. So that was a fine achievement. And again, it just kind of just puts the game to bed really with his interventions in the first half there. So that was brilliant. Yeah, I mean, listen. I mean, there was a particularly, I'm going to call it, dishonest piece in the Daily Mail today. I don't necessarily encourage anyone to give them the clicks really, but essentially calling out Celtic, say, this is the most boring treble that Celtic have ever won. I mean, listen, Celtic are where they are, right? And I'll never get bored of going back to this and re-emphasising this. Celtic are where they are, not through some sort of short-termism, not through sort of sugar daddy syndrome or anything like that. Celtic have built a sustainable and organic football club, grown since the mid-90s, thanks to Fergus McCann, and thanks to the custodians, since then, who we can criticise for some things and give praise for other things. We're all adults here. We don't have to take a binary stance on every single issue. Celtic are a well-run football club in many regards. And the growth of Celtic to what it is today, in terms of its financial advantage over the rest of Scottish football, has been achieved off of our own back, and it's been done honestly. It's not been done with dishonesty, with illegal tax schemes. It's not been done with access to funds that nobody else has got. It's, even our major shareholder may well be a billionaire, but he doesn't put money into the club. He's a shareholder the same as everybody else. It doesn't, he can't just plump money in, and he doesn't. We haven't had a share issue for nearly 20 odd years. So, this is a club that has grown, as I say, organically, off of our own back in a sustainable way, right? So I'm not going to get bored with that, right? The reason that this article today was so dishonest is this is a good conversation to have, right? This is an interesting topic. What is the rest of Scottish football doing? If I was looking at Scottish football and wanting to improve it, I wouldn't start by kicking the boot into Celtic, right? In these days, and you can look at every league in the world now, especially England, Spain, Italy. If you want to find bad owners, you don't have to look very hard, right? And if you want to find dubious practices, you don't have to look very hard. If you want to find bad faith owners who are in it to make money and don't give a crap about the communities that football club sits in, and how the football club operates. These American owners, this is very germane, these American owners, they don't want season ticket holders, right? They want subscribers, right? They don't want season ticket holders. So all of that plays against the notion of what football is, what a club should be, which is what I believe, which is at the centre of a community of people. And Celtic is that, and continues to be that. And so this article, as I say, it could, if there had been an honest debate about how can we make Scottish football better, what can clubs be doing to improve themselves, but it wasn't. As the payoff in the last couple of paragraphs emphasised, this was just another little twerp who actually all he wants is for make Rangers great again. That's essentially is what he's saying. That doesn't fix Scottish football, by the way, right? Because that's never going to happen. in a sustainable way without the same kind of journey as what Celtic went through. And so, this is a club that has grown, as I say, organically off of our own back in a sustainable way, thanks to Fergus McCann, and thanks to the custodians, who are in it to make money and don't give a crap about the communities that football club sits in, and how the which takes time and it takes patience. We didn't win as soon as Fergus McCann came in. In fact, it took a number of years. And even then, we were kind of at a parity situation thanks to the, illegal tax scams at the other end of the city. We got here by merit, so I'm never getting bored of it. Right, I'm never getting bored of that. If we were doing things which were, nefarious, if we were doing things which weren't sustainable, even, do you know who'd be on Celtic board's back? We would, right? Not the press would, and rightly so, and we would. We'd be calling them to account. So, there is a debate to be had about how to make Scottish football better. So let's have it. Let's have it honestly. And why don't you encourage these fans of all these other clubs like Aberdeen, Hibs, Hearts, even the Rangers, to hold their own boards to account, to say, why aren't you doing better? Why aren't you a better version of yourself? Why aren't you operating sustainably? Why do you keep going through managers? Why do you keep buying players from, God knows where, spending a lot of money on them and then failing? Those are all valid questions to ask, I think.
I mean, they could start by encouraging their fans to turn up for games. That would be a start, rather than selling their stadium to 3 stands to another club so that they can effectively have another home game. But there's a whole conversation there about the marketability of Scottish football and how we don't even market it to our fans in our own country well enough. But Alan, you've only got yourself to blame, upsetting yourself reading the Daily Mail. That's
very true. I accept that.
Yeah, James, it's a. I want to say it's a very un-American thing. I don't know if you can correct me on this, but it seems in British culture anyway that, as Alan says, he wouldn't start by sticking the boot in Celtic to improve the game. But that seems to be the notion of it from a British standpoint of, like, rather than try and get everybody else to meet the standards of the strongest, they would rather pull that strongest one down to the mediocrity of the rest, I feel like. Is that a fair assessment, do you think, of the way the narrative is at the moment as far as Celtic is going, and calling a successful team boring because they keep winning?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of framing and perspective. So again, I didn't read that article. I'll
don't bother.
Probably not. Yeah, I was going to say I probably will not. I agree with Alan. It's a fascinating topic for debate. I've talked to Kieran at Improving Scottish Football podcast about some of this on his show, and so I get why neutrals and even people outside of Scottish football, that aren't really living and breathing this every day like we do. This is not unique to Scotland and Celtic. I mean, if there is an element of this that's the inflation of media rights with the Champions League that has, in ways, distorted leagues across Europe. So whether it's Croatia, Serbia, like the clubs that have gotten consistent entree into the Champions League in the last really 5 seasons, this has started to ramp as far as the detachment. So the idea that you're getting leagues that are pseudo fait accompli before the season even starts across Europe is not that unusual. It's actually becoming more and more the norm. And why I find a league like Belgium so fascinating, and I've talked about it, and we'll continue to talk about it most likely if Tony Bloom ends up getting directly involved materially at Hearts, is that there's something different going on there. It's almost its own little ecosystem in this broader landscape. So I think Celtic, I agree with everything that Alan said as far as the custodians and, there's almost a unique level of, accumulation of excess capital at the club that other clubs haven't, even the ones that are well run within those contexts and have benefited from the inflation, have not benefited the way that Celtic have, the way that they've been managed. So I want to point that out. But I think the more interesting, and again, as an American, I come at this as a relative outsider, all of the things that Alan say as far as community clubs, the cynic in me would argue that was set up as almost like a feudal system in these culturally, they was used as a way to try and kind of placate the working, the people in the coal mine shafts that Allen's nearby. Their 6-day week, 5.5-day week work week, and then go to the football. The football was a way to kind of give them something to enjoy, and have that community involvement, to placate the working class almost in a way.
I would come back on that slightly, and I don't know if Alan agrees with me or not. I think that is an American way of looking at it, that the rich guys came in and gave the community a team. I think the history of football in this country is that the communities created that team. Rather
and
than
they get co-opted by the wealthy is kind of how.
Yeah, the people that then ran these clubs, and I'm generalizing hugely here, were from the same communities. They were the mill owners and the factory owners and the mine owners and what have you, and they were doing it, largely. But football was very different then, in terms of maximum wage and all this sort of thing, and tight. There was a real tension between amateurism and professionalism and all that. So we can go on for hours if you want on that topic, but yes, I wouldn't position it in the way that you have. These were all people in the community, and the ones who had the money were the ones that were prepared to then, get themselves status and recognition within the community because they saw that this was valuable to that community. I would phrase it in that way, not necessarily that they were trying to cynically kind of placate the people so much.
Yeah, I think. So obviously it's specific to each community, and generally these things tend to happen organically as opposed to like some top-down sinister plan that takes place. But more so, the way I frame it is the competitive dynamics, meaning that because it was kind of set up the way, and there was no free movement of labor, the Bosman rule hadn't, so you had almost like an ecosystem of, like Scotland in the 70s into the 80s, where you had more of a flat competitive structure where almost any club that was reasonably well run or had a great talent cycle, an infusion of local talent to just happen to blossom at the same time, you get these great rivalries and real competitive dynamics. And what's happened, and this is the irony to your point, Laura, is that what the American model is to bring in a return to that kind of, in the American sense, artificially engineered feudalism. Again, I'm phrasing it that way, in order, using salary caps, using the draft, using, not having pro rel. This is a way to create a flatter competitive landscape in order to make it a better entertainment product. So I think there is a big question relative to European football in general and the distortion that's taken place because of Champions League money and European money, media money, and how stretched the competitive dynamics have gotten, not only within leagues, EPL basically detaching from pretty much everybody other than Real Madrid at this point. Even Barcelona is a basket case financially. So there's not many clubs that can ratchet up to that level, let alone the whole league. And then even within leagues, like in Scotland, like much of the rest of Europe and the smaller countries, the smaller leagues, you've got one club, maybe a second, that are detaching financially. And so clubs winning 7 or 8 or 9 in a row, or 9 out of the last 10 leagues, is actually becoming more and more the norm. So I think that's an issue of, because ultimately and again, this is the vast majority of Celtic supporters aren't going to give a crap, just like the vast majority of, Zagreb supporters or Red Star or whoever, right? Whoever it might be, if it's your club for the most part, because a lot of what stitches this together is more about more than just winning and losing. But as a ecosystem, as a product, you have to have jeopardy. It's sport. Like you can't, you can't go into a game where 99.9% of the time the expectation is one side's going to win. That's not really sport. That's kind of, that's the Harlem Globetrotters versus the Washington Generals, right? So then you got to entertain a different way in order to bring eyeballs and enjoyment. So I think there's a lot of interesting topics for debate around this and how to get back to a flatter competitive situation. We've talked about it as far as going kind of cross European leagues with tiers. This is why we talk about peer groups and how it's important to measure Celtic versus, the Club Bruges and, even a Bodo Glimt, some of the teams in the Netherlands like PSV, they're right on our strata of resources. So could you get a multi-tiered pyramid of, clubs that are kind of matched relatively resource-wise? That seems to be what UEFA's kind of sort of backing into. So I think this is all germane to this conversation about how the ecosystem is restructured. The Super League, which is the American feudal model, versus kind of a hybrid approach, which it looks like UEFA is trying to do. But yeah, just it's classic clickbait to throw it out as boring for any single club. I mean, I think that's just kind of lowest common denominator nonsense. That distracts from, I think, very interesting, important conversations about, multi-generational. How are these clubs going to survive at the scale that they are? And with, again, Celtic are the exception, not the rule. Vast majority of them are financial basket cases or financial basket case adjacent. So, how is this going to be sustainable in the next 20, 30 years as our generation, moves towards the inevitable, and the competitive dynamics for entertainment dollars and eyeballs are much more difficult as you go down, kind of 35 and under.
Yeah, it's it's certainly something that I think we could dig into in a lot more depth, and we certainly will over the coming months. Alan, I'm aware you're pressed for time, so if at any point you need to jump off to go and watch your match, then obviously please do.
We've got a few minutes left. Yeah.
I just hope he doesn't get carjacked. That would be horrible if we watch that live.
No. Yeah, you're confusing. You're conflating. The culture and the economic background and reality of the environment I'm in with crime, James. I'm not sure.
I didn't do that.
I'm not sure that's appropriate, really. These are fine.
No, not at all. It's just
these are fine people. These are fine people.
Not that complicated. You're just in your car. That's all I was saying. What bad could happen to you in your car?
I was about to say I would love this, but I wouldn't actually love it. But Alan suggested that he's in one of the safest parts of the country, only to then be carjacked live on the podcast would be rather rich. Alan, given the conversation we're talking about, it is pretty pertinent to talk about the progression in the potential takeover at the Rangers from none other than an American consortium. What's your thoughts on the updates around that and where it currently stands compared to a few weeks ago when we last spoke about it?
Yep. So, and again, to answer the inevitable, why are we talking about this on a Celtic pod? And again, the answer is the same as it's been since February, which is there is nowhere. You show me, and anyone can correct me in the comments. There is nowhere where this is discussed in any adult way in terms of, what does it mean? What are the implications? What are the potential pitfalls? What are the advantages? All of those things. And that's dishonest, again, to the whole of Scottish football, because it impacts Scottish football. It impacts Celtic because we're talking about, the biggest rival. And it's also, as we talked about, as James outlined well, it's all part of the shifting landscape, really, of club ownership around Europe, with increasing Americanization, which brings with it different ideas, different perspectives, different goals, really, and aspirations as to what these people want out of a football club, and different methods as well, which can be advantageous or can be harmful to the club, depending on your perspective and the fans. So all these things are interesting, and we are badly served by journalists who simply want to deal in hope and provide, giddy updates without any analysis, any perspective, any context, any criticality at all. So that's why we talk about it. So the gushing news this week was that there is a route to 51%, which again doesn't solve all the problems. 51% isn't absolute control. You need more than that to be able to effectively do what you want. There's still significant blockers that can be put in by existing shareholders, even if you get to a so-called majority. But the news is that there's a path to that, but that path involves a share issue, which is quite interesting, because that implies that there isn't enough interest in selling it whatever the price is, or there isn't enough money in the consortium to buy out all the people that they would need to buy out to get to that true controlling point ratio. And therefore, the plan is therefore to simply get some level of control and persuade people on the board, as it will become, to simply issue more shares. And the consortium presumably will then buy them at probably they think they will hope an advantageous price. And everybody will be happy to either be diluted or to have to sell their shares to the consortium. That all sounds incredibly complicated to me. I mean, I'm sure James could probably put me right here and tell me that this is the best possible outcome that you could go for, and it's great news for all bears and all that sort of thing. I'm sure that is the case, as the journalists say. But again, it's just really to raise the point that this is sounding like, again, Occam's razor. Do they have enough money in the consortium, and are there enough shareholders in a very diverse and complicated shareholder landscape? Are there enough shareholders that actually want to sell? And question, right? These things are not simple. These things are not complicated. And given current economic environment, and again, I'm not saying this won't happen. I'm not saying any of that, But if it does happen, these people are not benefactors. We'll have to keep coming back to that point as well. They're there to make money. That's essentially what they're there to do. So let's not forget that. But yeah, that's the latest. But again, really, where is the critical analysis?
Yeah, James, I guess it comes back to the point that, again, not to blow our own trumpet, but we all said and at the time that this was first discussed and was in the news, don't go counting your chickens too early in terms of if you think this investment will be a good thing for the club and you're a Rangers supporter. There was a lot of due diligence still to be done, a lot of cogs in the wheel still to turn, and it does seem like the more that's coming out, there's still more to sort of trudge through in terms of due diligence to get to a point where they feel ready and able to actually take over the club. I guess it's a lesson in, like I say, just being patient, I suppose.
Yeah, and that's my skepticism's too strong of a word probably, but balanced posture on whether this was likely. The big downside was this issue of herding cats. And again, I'm not an expert on Rangers' capital structure or their organizational documents and their bylaws. I mean, these are when people talk about due diligence. One of the due diligence that takes place on this type of corporate transaction or potential corporate transaction is exactly what's going on. Meaning that the potential acquirer goes in and says, okay, if I get this percentage of minority stake owners that are going to be a pain in my what, how do I basically ram it down their throat using the bylaws and navigate voting blocks, percentiles for this, meaning that they might have a different threshold for a rights offering versus a takeover. You have different, 2/3 versus a simple majority, or even, a plurality, depending on, almost like a parliamentary system with blocks of shareholders, that kind of thing. So without having a knowledge of what those rules actually are, this isn't all that surprising. This is why, we talked about that this could take a while, is because this is the kind of thing that happens when there's complexity. Is you're going to have or it's more likely that you're going to have this kind of machination in order to, when you have a fragmented shareholder base, inevitably, unless it's such a magnanimous buyer who's just like, oh, you know what, a benefactor type that's just going to throw money at something. They're going to want to negotiate a price that's advantageous to them. And that means inevitably there's going to be a material amount of the shareholder base that don't like it. that might even be obstructionist or worse. Become almost like a rebellious faction within the shareholder base to try to kill the deal. Because they think that the price that's being offered is ridiculous, or the value and price are always different depending on one's perspective. So yeah, I think this is not unsurprising. I mean, I didn't have any particular insight that a share offering or a rights offering was likely to be part of it, but it makes sense now that it's coming out. Like, this is a normal kind of thing that can happen as trying to patch together this level of complexity in a deal. But that complexity is also how it could fall apart. To Alan's point, not saying it will, but I don't think things have changed all that much, to be honest. I mean, that we're still kind of, it has to get patched together. And if they're going to get to this threshold of transaction level cohesion, that's the path. And then, to Alan's point, then you have operational risk after that with a potential fragmented ownership group, where you might have a block of people that are pissed that they got the transaction rammed down their throat through what can be perceived as not nefarious, but aggressive corporate tactics in order to get a deal done. So these are all the complexities that can manifest over time, that can make it tough to have everyone singing from the same hymn sheet, as they might say, strategically and directionally, to get everyone lined up.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting thing to observe, and I have to say, some of the narrative around Rangers supporters sort of suggesting that Celtic fans are just clutching at straws and panicking. I to be honest, I have no skin in the game as far as that's concerned, because even if it did go through, I have no idea how they work operationally, whether it would benefit the club or not. There's an element to it that I think, they can't possibly be run much worse than they are at the moment, so anything's going to be an improvement. But you just never know with these people coming in. You see so often with these Championship and League 1 and 2 clubs in England, where you get a guy with loads and loads of money come in and he's going to change the club. You only need to look as far as clubs like Reading, and not so far from Allen, Sheffield Wednesday, where these saviours were supposed to come in and bring the club back to former glories, and it just didn't happen.
Well, I mean, these things often work out well, and you mentioned Sheffield Wednesday. I mean, these things often can work out quite well in the short term, but a football club isn't just for Christmas, and it's year upon year upon year. Sustaining the levels. If you do manage to improve certain aspects of the club, if you improve players, if you get yourself just on the cusp of either promotion to the Premier League or the cusp of getting into the Champions League, and you don't make it, next year you've got all these costs, and then what do you do then? And then you start dipping into your own pocket. And they're not all bad owners, and most of them. There are some really bad owners, like you mentioned Reading. There's a few more as well, especially in England. And I've seen in Scotland as well, actually. Most of them start off with the best of intentions, but this is tough stuff, right? And it's very tough, especially if you want to make money out of it. And that's really what what we can say with certainty is that these guys aren't doing it because they love the Rangers. They're doing it because they want to make money, or they think they can make money out of it, right? So that is very tricky to do. Not only to be competitive, to be sustainable, to grow, and to make money. Balancing all of those things is a very, very tricky thing to do, and takes probably experience and trial, error, and a lot of mistakes getting made along the way. It could work out. I mean, this is a club who should be second, or as you said, Laura, they're run dreadfully now, and they've got a kind of disinterested shareholder base who are probably, to say disinterested, I mean, they've kept the lights on for years, but they're probably maxed out, frankly, and don't have the wherewithal or the will to keep it, to keep going in the manner to which it is accustomed. That's natural too, by the way. But even having said all that, they're still very solidly into second place. Although, a year of a coherent Hibs, a year of Hearts being kind of, bloom powered, if I can put it that way. If Aberdeen stick with Jimmy Tillene and the project starts to gain coherence, that second place starts to look quite, I'd be more concerned if I was them than Celtic for now, not to be complacent and not to say Celtic don't have challenges. And as you said, in some respects, a coherent, invested and intelligent set of owners coming in at Ibrox, would that force Celtic to up their game? And that would come back to, would that improve Scottish football? It might boost the coefficient and all that sort of thing. So, I'm honestly, I don't know. I'm not that bothered either way. I mean, if it doesn't happen, then clearly it'll be bloody hilarious, given all the dishonest hype that has been put on around this and lack of critical analysis around it. But if it does happen, then will that have a kind of a beneficial effect to the whole of Scottish football, and in terms of other owners coming in for some of the other clubs, and will it make everybody up their game, I suppose, and will that improve Scottish football? Can we get back to guaranteed Champions League places? These things could all help Celtic, actually.
Yeah, a rising tide raises all ships, as they say. We'll see if that turns out to be the case. But in the meantime, Alan, we will let you go and get your place on the touchline.
He's off to fight some coal mining women or something, from what he said earlier. I don't know.
That'll be a very short fight, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't rate Alan's chances if that's the case.
I've just been looking out to see if I can find the prawn sandwich. Where we can get a prawn sandwich from, and then I'll take my position accordingly.
Yikes! I don't know if I would be touching those prawns myself, but anyway, thank you very much, Alan, from your car seat. I have to say, it's been entertaining to see you out and about, podcasting on the go, as they say. And thank you, James, as always, for your insights. Thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe and check us out on huddlebreakdown.com if you want to see more of our content. And we will see you again next week.